All right, top of the morning. Good morning. This is your boy Big Rich. Salute to everybody, including the trolls, the haters, the losers, the rats, the worms, the vultures, the snakes. Good morning to everybody. Life is good. Anyway, welcome to another segment of Mob Story. You know how we do. Salute to my boy Shattered for sending me the story. This is out of my own hometown of Queens. Let's talk about it. Giannini Crew in Queens was linked to several crime families. Joseph Galante was a member of the notorious Giannini Crew, a group of dozens of young wannabes based in a cafe in Queens when he helped get rid of the corpse of Thomas Sanjane, whose throat was slashed in 1991 as part of a cocaine ripoff scheme. Galante would later flip, hoping that his efforts to help the feds would help mitigate his prison time. But then he resumed committing crimes, and prosecutors discarded their cooperation agreement with him. Then, at his 2016 trial, Assistant U.S. Attorney Shreve Arale told federal judge Nicholas Garufis the defendant committed one of the most heinous crimes you can conceive of committing. Galante faced 30 years to life and got away with a 10-year sentence. Federal Judge Nicholas Garofis was well aware of the extraordinary length of time he served as an informant and making secret recordings of mobsters from the Bonanno, Colombo, and Gambino crime families. Desgraciad. The crew showed up on the Fed's radar following the mid 1980s Pizza Connection case when they learned that some Bonanno wise guys were still generating cash from the drug business. Crack cocaine had replaced heroin as the major item of the menu, as per court records and testimony. Law enforcement soon noticed crews were selling crack and powder cocaine out of some cafes and coffee shops in Queens and Brooklyn. Prosecutors suspected that Brooklyn based cocaine trade was being operated and overseen by associates of Anthony Sparrow, the Bonanno consigliere with social clubs on Bath Avenue. Then in Queens, federal investigators stumbled across Baldo Amato, who had been convicted years earlier in the Pizza Connection case. Amato appeared to be mentioning a bunch of mob associates who were based out of a cafe in Ridgewood known as Cafe Gianni. The Gianni Crew robbed some gambling operations in other clubs and also became involved in drug dealing, according to the investigators. James Walden, a prosecutor in the Brooklyn U.S. Attorney Office, filed indictments against Amato, Sparrow, and associates. Years later, Walden thought it plausible that Massino, who had warned Frank Lino about drug dealings, may have taken a cut of the money as tribute, even if he knew it was narcotics cash. The Gianni Crew. They often hung out where 78th Avenue met 74th Street in Glendale, Queens, not too far from my crib. Describing one of them, a source told Jerry Capesi how the gang members would stand there on the street, flexing his muscles and trying to impress girls at junior high school 119. He worked at Hot Bagels on Metropolitan Avenue for a while, but he ran with the punks in the Gianni Crew and the Middle Village Boys. Back in the 1990s, the Gianni Crew had ties to the Gambino, Colombo, and Bonanno crime families. The crew robbed banks and businesses primarily concentrated in Ridgewood, Maspeth, Rego Park, and Middle Village. The crew used Baldo Amato's Cafe Gianni in Queens' Ridgewood section as its home base, hence the name. Many of them were sons of Sicilian gangsters and drug dealers. These mafia affiliated gangs were once visible in most of the neighborhoods of New York's boroughs. The Ridgewood Boys among the Queens gangs. In Brooklyn, there was the Bath Avenue Crew, and in Staten Island, there was the New Springville Boys. They had commonalities. They were violent gangs of young men, most of whom had grown up in mafia run neighborhoods and families. All wanted their own button. The New York Times in 1998 described the Gianni Crew as a scourge of Western Queens who robbed banks and businesses, committed arson and extortion, and murdered other gangsters in disputes and double crosses. The Times in June 2000 noted that members of the crew were already prosecuted twice through a pair of linked indictments that led to more than 24 guilty pleas and the closure of Cafe Gianni in 1998. And later in 2000, 16 additional members, including Baldassare Baldo Amato, were scheduled to go on trial as per a third indictment in Brooklyn. The crew's exploits were so unusually vicious that a judge once said in court that she had never seen anything like them in all her years on the bench. Richard A. Brown, rest in peace, you cocksucker, a Queens district attorney, prosecuted some early cases against the gang and said they have never hesitated to use violence to settle a personal score, to extort a small businessman, or to commit a robbery. Type. They were a nefarious band of brazen hoodlums attracted to all types of illegal behavior: bank robbery, loan sharking, arson, extortion, drug dealing, and gambling and murder. Crew members were sophisticated enough to gauge police response time by calling 911 outside houses they planned to rob. Yet barbarous enough for one to shoot a woman 15 years old in the stomach because she was 6 months pregnant with his child and refused to have an abortion. Among the group's victims were drug dealers John Rusi and Stephen Pagnozzi. The double murder is considered the crew's most atrocious crime. On January 1992, Risi and Pagnozzi were lured to the Giannini Club. The crew tried to force them to reveal where the duo had hid a major marijuana stash. They refused and they were each shot in the head. The crew stuffed the bodies into plastic bags and hid them in Ruisi's truck, which was driven to a street in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, where Anthony Schiaccia, a crew member, doused the corpses with gasoline and set them on fire. Schiaccia later revealed Ruisi, who had been shot in the temple, was still alive. Ruisi apparently said the gas felt cold when it splashed on his body, a court filing said. In September 1998, the man named as a Gianni's crew boss, Vito Guzzo, 33 at the time, stood before a federal judge in Brooklyn courthouse and pleaded guilty to 5 murders, among other crimes. His plea marked what officials said was the final step in smashing the so-called Giannini Crew, which was first developing into a mafia-style organized crime gang in Queens in the early and middle 1990s. He was the 26th member of the group to plead guilty to charges that ran the spectrum from murder to arson and racketeering and everything in between. Guzzo pled guilty, and the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York agreed with the judge that 38 years in prison was his due. 2 years prior to Guzzo's sentencing, the FBI and NYPD started arresting suspected members of the group. The arrest followed a years-long probe by the Joint Bank Robbery Task Force comprised of FBI agents and NYPD detectives, which linked the 14-member crew to a series of anything-goes armed robbery, violent assaults, and arson conspiracies dating from 1992. Some crew members were arrested as far back as 1989. These are bad kids who have been doing this for a long time, said one law enforcement. The owners of the building which the cafe was housed in, Francesca and Salvatore Bartolotta, were convicted in the 1980s pizza connection case. The Bartolottas' then 22-year-old son Fabio was then named as boss in a federal indictment in which he and his 13 co-defendants were charged with 5 armed bank robberies, shooting 2 retired cops during a botched armored car heist, assorted store robberies, arson for profit, extortion, and transporting stolen goods. Those murdered by the gang mostly were other gangsters. One victim, Ralph Sciulla, was killed because he was committing lucrative crimes but not allowing other members of the crew to participate. He ate alone, so they killed him. Judge Johnson asked Guzzo to describe his crimes aloud. The young mob associate then read from a piece of paper in matter-of-fact tones of a waiter reciting the offerings at a cafe. I killed Ralph Sciulla by shooting him in the head, he said. I killed Anthony Messi by shooting him. I shot John Borelli, etc., etc. Motto on the street since Lilo days finally went away for good. The enduring Sicilian gangster, long rumored to have helped kill mafia boss Carmen Galante in one of New York's most storied mob slayings, was hit with a slew of racketeering charges, including murder. The charges against Baldo Amato were part of a sweeping federal indictment against 21 associates of the Bonanno, Gambino, and Colombo crime families, all members of a violent Queens gang that wreaked criminal havoc from here to the Catskills.